My next guest helped take Tesla international.
I came across Tesla about 18 years ago.
People think businesses succeed because of strategy, but Shan helps companies succeed by bringing them a repeatable process for global expansion.
System for doing it. The system is client sensitive, but internally inflexible. You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
This former physicist has built a company of 300 people, and they help companies expand into 68 countries. He does this from a first principle standpoint.
Physicists can do anything because physics teaches you to think logically.
And that's why his systems produce repeatable results, not chaos. He keeps all 300 employees aligned on delivering the promise of the business.
No politics. Politics is the beginning of the end of a company.
He's charismatic, but doesn't rely on his charisma to drive results.
I would be tearing my hair out, chasing them to get answers. And you can seriously under-communicate, but you can never over-communicate.
Today, we're talking about the operating system of repeatable results. Here's Dr. Shan Nair. Dr. Shan Nair, welcome to Lighthouse Leadership. Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk about your journey and how you helped Tesla go international, which is a fascinating story. But first, I'd like to hear about your origin story. Like, how did you got a PhD in nuclear physics from Oxford. How did you go from that to international services consulting?
First of all, thank you for inviting me here. My Oxford tutor, when I was an undergraduate, because I was also an undergraduate there, used to tell me that a physicist can do anything because physics teaches you to think logically. You don't have to remember anything. You can work everything out on the back of an envelope using first principles and logic. And that definitely sticks in my mind, and I think he was absolutely correct in that regard. You are quite right that I started my career off as a nuclear physicist. I was working in the nuclear power industry in the UK, which the then Conservative government decided to privatize. The privatization process, as part of that, we had to look at the costs of decommissioning of the nuclear power stations, as this would have been a material cost if the nuclear power stations had been included in the privatization program. This was done by a group that I ran using a combination of nuclear engineers and accountants, because we were calculating liabilities going out to 200 years on a discounted cash flow basis. So it is important to understand both the physics and the engineering of decommissioning, as well as the chemistry, by the way, and also the accounting, how you accrue for these costs, how you discount them, how you do a cash flow over such long periods of time. So in the process, I became an accountant as well. Now, we were able to show that basically there was no way in which the UK nuclear power stations at the time could be privatized, even as part of a otherwise profitable business, because a lot of the costs of the nuclear fuel cycle are at the back end in decommissioning, and a large number of the UK's then Magnox power stations are reaching the end of their operating life. So there was relatively less amount of revenue that a privatized company could enjoy, and a lot of costs that would hit them once the revenue stream stopped. So I kind of realized that the privatization process, it means that really there's no future for nuclear power. It's in the state sector because the government has no other option. Government doesn't really want it. It's being forced on the government, and so might be much better off career-wise looking at other possibilities. So I decided that I would work for myself and that I would set up an accounting business. The issue when you set up an accounting business is what's different about you, what's your USP? And I realized fairly early on, these US tech companies, whose technology, by the way, I was very interested in, telecoms companies, IT companies, internet companies, they were coming along like babes in the woods to Europe, not understanding the local employment laws, not understanding the type of entity they need to set up, having very little support on the ground in the new geography to help them ensure that they operate in a compliant way. And I thought to myself, well, why don't we offer these companies a model where we take all the hassle out of international expansion so that their salespeople can concentrate on selling, their R&D people can concentrate on developing the IP, and we take care of the back end of the operation in the foreign country. So we take care of all the returns, we take care of all the local country compliant employment agreements, we advise them on what the benefits are and put those in place. So in those days, a lot of US companies were coming to UK. UK was the first port of call, naturally, because of a common language and history. So the first model that we rolled out was US to UK, and it was very popular. Once clients understood what it was that we were offering, generally speaking, I had my arm whipped off. And then we expanded it, where the clients, having arrived in UK, were now expanding into France, Germany, Netherlands, Nordic countries, Eastern Europe. We expanded the model to USA to Europe. So that was the first phase. The second phase was USA to APAC and Asia. And the third phase was USA to LATAM. So that essentially the business rolled out, and we are now currently supporting clients in about 68 countries worldwide. So the basic principle of the service is very simple. We take the hassle off you. All the local regulatory hassle we take off you. We work out with you what type of entity you need to set up, and then we basically set it up. We'll need information from you, but once you give us that information, it's our job to get it all set up, get it ready to do business, and then support it while it's doing business. But in practice, it's very complicated because even within the European Union, every country has different laws. So 68 countries means 68 different sets of regulations, 68 different sets of filing calendars, etc., etc. So the business is complex internally, but externally in terms of the support, it's very simply expressed. That was the context in which I came across Tesla about 18 years ago.
So, that's fascinating. Let me recap a bit to see if I can understand. So you started as a nuclear physicist. The UK started to privatize their nuclear industry. You took over the accounting of that, and you were looking at the cost of privatization. You found that the cost of decommissioning was too high for anybody to manage as private, because those costs all come after the income stream ends. So there's a eureka moment there. So I think you helped the UK understand that privatization would not work.
The privatization of nuclear power was not possible. The privatization of the coal-fired and oil-fired power stations happened. And essentially they became public companies. But nuclear power had to be hived off and couldn't be privatized.
Hived off, that's a new term for me. What do you mean by that?
Cut off. It had to be removed from the assets that were being privatized. All the nuclear assets were retained within state control, government control, in a company that was where the government was the shareholder.
I understand. Thanks for that. Okay, so then you find Tesla, right? So I drive a Tesla in the United Kingdom. So it's a really nice experience, actually. And I can tell it was not just about shipping cars here, right? I mean, they've got a charging infrastructure. So there was, they had to do engineering. They had to do negotiation, real estate. They've got to get all these people. When I need service, they come to me, or I drive to them, and the experience is very, very smooth. But it's not just shipping cars. So can you help me understand a company like Tesla or X, Y, or Z? What's the first thing that you really help them look at so they can just kind of focus on their core while you're taking care of this really the business operations?
Sure. So if you take a typical example, a US tech company needs to set up an assembly center in a foreign country, A, and needs to set up a QA in either A or B before shipping a product to the US. And let's say that A is Taiwan and B is UK, as an example. So the first step is to figure out what needs to be set up. There are three options: subsidiary, branch, or representation office. So essentially, to figure that out, you need to understand first what the headcount is that you're planning to have in the first year, and what the activities of those people are going to be in relation to the core activities of your business. So if, say, you are in a car business, then assembling cars is pretty core, and doing QA and checking that the cars have been assembled properly is also pretty core. So the first step would be that if the QA, say, is done in the UK, you need a subsidiary, especially if your headcount in the UK initially, the first year, is going to be more than 5 people. In the case of Taiwan, which is where the assembly is one place where assembly is often done, um, it's a different consideration because Taiwan and US do not have a double tax treaty because the US doesn't formally recognize Taiwan as an independent country. So what that means is that if you set up a subsidiary in Taiwan, if a US company set up a subsidiary in Taiwan, the taxes paid in Taiwan would not be available as a tax credit in the US. So the way to get around that is to set Taiwan up as a branch of the US. So there are factors like that. What is the headcount? What are the activities? Is there a double tax treaty? Uh, Essentially, what is your projected headcount over the next 5 years, etc. that come in. Then there is so now you figure out what you need to set up. Now it's a question of dotting I's, crossing T's, making the applications, getting it set up. UK, it's pretty quick. Taiwan takes a bit longer. Now you come down to the mechanics. I've got to find an office or a factory website, factory location, something like that. In Taiwan, basically 2 things. The Taiwanese branch has got to have a Chinese name. The Chinese name is very important. The name in Mandarin, the Chinese name is very, very important. And secondly, a foreign company cannot just go and have its local branch or subsidiary rent any old office. The landlord needs to have approval from the government to rent to a foreign body. So, it's things like this where, US company not being held by the hand and guided properly in the local country can go wrong. They can just go and rent an office and the landlord won't tell them, and they'll pay the rent, sign the contract, and 1 year later find out that they're illegal. They're not allowed to operate from there when the regulatory authorities say make a visit. So I'm just bringing a few things like this out just to give a flavor of the kind of local support that's required and how this can vary. Importance of Chinese name, the cultural difference in Japan. Although theoretically you can set up a branch manager has much less business credibility than a director of a GK, Japanese subsidiary. So if you really want to seriously sell in Japan, the odds are you need a subsidiary. And it's not even a accounting or tax question. It's a business question, and a local culture question. So these things all get factored into the advice that a client needs to receive and should get from a proper service provider that right from the beginning we try to inculcate and get out and support as we expand it. But initially we went US, UK, then US Schengen, then US Europe, then US India because we set up an operation in India, then US Far East, and then of course US Mexico and Canada were in between, somewhere between Europe and India, and then US LATAM was the last.
That's fascinating. I mean, I can see if I was making pencils, I don't want to have to think about that. Or I can imagine how, like, I wouldn't even know where to start without calling you, and I just want to focus on pencils. This thing is my passion, right? And I don't know about getting real estate or setting up a subsidiary or an entity. I can see how you take a lot of pain off of a business owner's shoulders, big or small.
Yeah. Also laterally, also also laterally, we have started now to get interest in China for Chinese companies expanding abroad. And we've helped the Chinese company, for example, with their setup in Namibia and Outer Mongolia. So we're just starting to get traction in China. As Chinese companies now expand into Europe and other countries.
So it's not just American companies moving around
Not
anymore.
anymore.
These are actually Chinese companies who are. Is that
Yes,
new? Is
it's
that new to
relatively
you, or is
new.
that new to the world?
It's new to us, and we don't know of anybody else doing it.
It's a big market. And so, all right. So you're helping companies expand into 68 countries. And you've just mentioned that you've got an office in India. How many offices do you have?
We have local people in every one of the 68 countries, but our core offices are in California, Bristol in the UK, Mumbai, Singapore, and Beijing.
What does your organizational structure look like? Do you have like regional leaders and then there's a staff, or?
It's very centralized for a company that's offering a one-stop shop. It needs to be centralized. So basically, I'm the owner and the guy at the top who can't pass the buck any further up. Um, and then reporting to me, I have a COO and a CFO. And then reporting to the COO is the operations division. Reporting to the CFO is the internal finance and internal HR. I also have a business development VP and a marketing VP who are based in the US, because until now we've been doing a lot of virtually all our clients were US or Canada companies outbound, but we are also now starting business development operations in China. In fact, we've been targeting Chinese companies for 2 years. China is a very different culture to the US. It takes a long time for trust to be established and for efforts to yield results. But when they start yielding results, they're very solid results.
I'm sure. I worked at a company about over 20 years ago that made circuit breakers and motors, that sort of stuff. And they'd opened up a factory in Puerto Rico. And there was a very strange, a very surprising cultural difference that we saw there. Circuit breakers they get this sort of operation. Well, when they get put together, they go through this brazing oven. So the oven's very, very hot. There's two pieces of metal that have some braze between them. The braze melts. It's like welding, right? And it comes out the other end and the thing's assembled. But in the Puerto Rican factory, these contacts were popping off like popcorn when we went through the brazing factory. And it turned out that when we designed the assembly line, we had assumed a certain level of relative humidity, and the factory is air conditioned. But in Puerto Rico, people are not used to air conditioning. So they actually propped the door open, which meant the factory was more humid than the engineers had expected. Some moisture got into this circuit breaker and it would turn to steam in the brazing oven. It would just pop off. It was very, very surprising. Cultural differences come out in very, very strange ways sometimes. Do you have any examples that you can talk about? Maybe not something so recent that you can talk about with a cultural difference with one of these new regions that you moved into.
I think it's a good question that you brought up, but what you brought up is a technical problem, not a back office support problem, but an operational problem, a technical problem. And absolutely, you're right there. But culturally, from the back end, essentially, there are things to be alerted, sensitive to, and things to be alerted to avoid. So, for example, the sensitive items I've already mentioned examples like branch manager compared to company director in Japan. The culture in Singapore, for example, if you're at a party with your boss and you clink your glass with your boss, you always clink the lip of your glass below the lip of your boss's glass, never above. When you hand out a business card in the Far East, you have it in both hands and you hand it over to them very formally. And they spend a minute or two looking at it. You don't just throw it in, and when they give you their card, you should do the same. It's considered insulting to throw it in your pocket. You don't immediately go into a business meeting and start talking shop. You need a preliminary social conversation before you do it. You might be chomping at the bit to get to business, which is the American way and a valid way, but it doesn't work in the Far East. So there are things like that you need to avoid. Main area that you need to be very careful about when operating in foreign countries outside of Europe is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. because in many countries, the regulators are corrupt. And if you have a tax investigation or something similar to that, a regulatory audit, they will tell you, give us so much money and we'll go away. And that's a disaster. Um, so precisely because of that, we have a list of um, countries where the corruption index is so high that we don't want to operate. So, for example, in Africa, we only support clients in North Africa, in Morocco, and in South Africa. We don't in the rest of Africa. We don't in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, although they have their regulatory systems are very similar to the old pre-colonial British system that's been tweaked. Um, so it's easy to understand how the process works, but because of the corruption indices, we don't want to operate there. We've had many inquiries to help American companies in Nigeria in the oil business, but we don't want to operate there because of the high level of corruption. So FCPA is something, and the UK's Bribery Act, if it's a British company, is something that the directors of the company need to be very, very sensitive to, and to avoid pitfalls of taking shortcuts that can lead to disaster um, and possible, criminal prosecution or whatever years down the road.
That's very interesting. I can picture. Um, is that some of what your 68 local representatives help do? They help coach on the cultural differences and
Actually, funnily enough, no. The local colleagues run local payrolls because all payrolls are run in country. They're not run centrally out of India or somewhere. The payrolls are all run in country because often when you use payroll software, the updates will be provided so long as you're in country. If you're out of date and now your payroll will be wrong. So you need to be in country. So payrolls are all run in country, but then they are checked by an India support team that is familiar with the payroll running process of that particular country. But they're run in country, and the local contacts are there. If somebody has a problem with the payslip, they want to email somebody or call somebody locally. They don't want to call somebody in another country thousands of miles away. If you're in Argentina and you got a problem with your payslip, you don't want to be calling somebody in India. You want to call somebody in Buenos Aires and speak to them in Spanish. So that is the kind of purpose. And also in virtually every country, you have to be a local filing agent. The filing agent's got to be local. So even if accounts are prepared, statutory accounts and tax returns are prepared centrally, they have to be filed by a local agent. Um, and therefore, you have to have a local presence in every one of these countries to be able to operate. And that is what we do.
well, if I bring Lighthouse Leadership global, I'm clearly calling you. And I think what some of the things you're helping me understand here is obviously this is very, not only is this complex, but you guys really have it down. And so, I like to say that results without process is not repeatable, and process without results is futile. We see, I've certainly seen a lot in my career. How do you keep like everybody's eye on the ball? You must have. I'm picturing 68 playbooks for 68 countries, or something like that. Like how does Nucleus deliver results so consistently with such a broad team all across the world?
Right. Very good question. By doing two things that I did before I got into Nucleus. Essentially an R&D team and a software development team. So the R&D team maintains a knowledge base, a very comprehensive knowledge base that covers all the filing calendars, updates the filing calendars every year. Every time there's a change in regulation, updates it. Where there are changes in regulations, produces an internal briefing note for the client service directors so they can read through the notes, identify the ones that are applicable to their clients, contact their clients proactively and tell them, hey, the rules in country X are changing in 3 months, and this is what we need to do now or in next month or whatever, but this is what we need to do, so that clients are not in the process of saying, I heard from someone that this rule changed. Does it impact us? And getting an answer, oh, let's have a look into it. Oh, by the way, yes. they're told in advance. So there's an R&D team that is on top. It's a non-chargeable team. It's an overhead cost, but it's a very, very essential overhead cost. And it maintains a knowledge base. It also maintains a knowledge base of client engagements. So, for example, if a client, both Netherlands and Belgium, have contra-entry VAT rules for shipment of goods, you can pay the VAT and reclaim on the same form, unlike in the UK where you have to wait 3 months, up to 3 months. So you have a cash flow advantage. So if you've advised a client to get that sorted for Netherlands, the solution for another client now 6 months later with similar problem in Belgium, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You've already covered most of it. All you're doing is looking at the nuances of the changes in the VAT rules between Netherlands and Belgium and advising the client appropriately. So advice can be got out to the client, first of all, much faster, and secondly, much lower cost because you're spending less chargeable time. So you're cheaper and faster. And that's how you beat the opposition. So the R&D team is critical. The software development team is also very critical because they've developed bespoke software that, for example, enables clients to store their filings in the cloud, pull down the calendars in the cloud, um, be apprised of filing deadlines coming up, which also the client service directors are apprised, but the client's also informed, hey, you have a VAT filing coming up next month. We are on top of it, but this is so you know. The software was originally developed for internal purposes, but we've expanded it now so that clients can use it. So even if a client, say, using us in 2 countries, but they're in 15, they can store all their filings, they can pull down calendars, they can get reminders for all 15 countries, even if we're not supporting them in 13 of the 15. And in that respect, we are actually a software company to a very limited extent. We are. But we're going there really from the background of being a services company.
Wow. And is software under the COO as well?
Yes. Yes. The COO has got control of all of operations.
Yeah. Wow. That's a very surprising answer, Shan. I didn't see that coming. I wonder, does the software, I think obviously process is really important as how you get repeatable results. And I really prefer transparent processes. And so what I mean by that is when you can report directly out of the tools you use to manage the thing, then, the number of pizzas you're making and, you get the data directly from whatever's tracking. You're not making custom metrics. It comes directly out of the reporting programs. Are there dashboards and these sorts of things? Like how do I know if you and I start an agreement today and tomorrow, you start working down this checklist, how do I feel the progress that Nucleus is making on my behalf?
Okay. A lot of these processes have been because we've been doing this business for many years, they're proceduralized. So, there is a system for doing it. The system is client sensitive, but internally inflexible. You have to abide by the system. So, but it's client sensitive, client flexible, but not internally flexible. So essentially let's take an example. You're in the UK, I'm setting up a UK limited company. I'm getting it registered for payroll, VAT, for corporation tax. I'm registering it with the information commissioner. I'm opening a bank account, etc., etc., etc. I'm producing a UK compliant employment agreement. I'm getting the benefits set up. So all these are initial setup items. So what happens is that a checklist of items, all these items are listed in a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet then has client will do X, Nucleus will do Y, and that's agreed with the client. Timelines are then agreed and put in the spreadsheet. And then there is a review process. So, for example, for one client, we were setting them up simultaneously in 23 countries. It was a financial services company, and they needed subsidiaries in 23 countries to be able to handle other people's money. They weren't employing people; they were just having subsidiaries. So essentially, that's a major job. So the spreadsheet tracks the progress, and the spreadsheet flows through to a tracker. So it's essentially a bar chart. So spreadsheet is the tracker, and behind the tracker is a bar chart that then says red, green, yellow, and shows an end date, which is then regularly updated. So if you're setting up 23 countries simultaneously, you have weekly meetings with the client. If you're setting up one country, you have one meeting in the first month, and by the end of that month, you've done the job. Well, within about 6 weeks, you've done the job. So depending on the amount of work involved, complexity of the job, the country where rules can be very complex, or unlike UK where it's very simple, there are these spreadsheets and the tracker and the bar chart are maintained until the jobs are completed. And that's an internal process. Also, when now we move to regular support, there's another tracker that's agreed with the client. Things like, when is payday? How often do you process and pay expense claims? What is your policy on vendor payment? Who are we authorized to accept approvals to pay vendors? When do we send you a funds request? When are you going to send the funds? Where are you going to send the funds? Who is going to operate that bank account? What is your accounting close date? Is it month end plus 0, 1, 2, 3, 4? What is it? Do you have a hard close and a soft close? Because some public companies have a soft close, and then they have a hard close. So all these things are recorded in a tracker, and basically what we call internally an SOP, a standard operating procedure, is produced, which is then sent to the client. And once the client agrees it, the accounting and payroll team then operate that to that procedure. And then all we ask the client is, if you want to change it, give us a month's notice. But it's flexible. Like one client might say, our payday is the last working day of the month. Another might say payday is last working day minus 2 of the month. We're not like some of these huge big payroll firms that say, the payday is this, take it or leave it. But internally, the process is, this is the process, take it or leave it.
I love that quote, client sensitive, not internally flexible. Did you coin that?
Yeah. I made it up just now.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, but it's true.
It's a brilliant term. I mean, that's how you deliver on the promise of Nucleus. That's how you do it consistently.
Yeah.
This is our playbook. This is our playbook.
Yeah. The other thing that's different is that in the past, when I was using accountants and lawyers for another business of mine, I would be tearing my hair out, chasing them to get answers. And, I'm paying them, and then I'm wasting my time chasing them as well. And I think, why am I paying these people if I have to chase them? So we have a policy where any client query email coming in is responded to within 24 hours. Even if we can't respond properly, we can give a holding response. It's responded to, because when client is in one side of the Atlantic and we are thousands of miles away, you can seriously under-communicate, but you can never over-communicate. So even if somebody is on leave, like at the moment, the India office today is a public holiday in India, email comes in, there is a backup to every client service director, manager, and supervisor. There is a backup in another country or locally who will respond to say, we've received your email, thank you. We'll give you a proper response, the full response tomorrow or day after or whatever. We set the expectation, and then we're expected to deliver to that or to revise the expectation with a reason given. I said we would come back to you on Monday, but we can't but we expect to be able to come back to you on Wednesday.
That can build nothing but trust.
Yeah.
And just as I listen to how you keep your client apprised of the progress that you're making, that's what I feel. I feel trust. Everybody wants to be able to see that progress, especially when you're paying for it. I've had lawyers, and I don't hear from them for 2 weeks. And, I've got to, I'm going back through notes going, what was it that we talked about? Am I supposed to be doing something? No, I think it's them. And I call them. Are you working on this? Oh yeah, we finished it. Oh, okay. So now I've got to do something, but you're not doing that. You're pushing them status. Here's where I am. Here's what you need to do. And here's what I've just
Yeah.
done for you.
Yes.
That's a transparent process, builds a lot of trust right there.
But basically, it's good for both parties because it pushes the client to deliver or not deliver. But then if they don't deliver, they can't blame you, right? Because there's clear evidence, and it also keeps you on the ball because when you've received what you need to receive, you know you got to deliver by the timeline you said you would, or you've got to explain why you can't.
Yeah, I picture a chess clock in my head, right? Hit the clock, it's their turn now, right? You can see how long they're on the clock. They finally fill out their bit. They hit the clock, and now it's your turn. But you're turning these things around in 24 hours once they hit their button. That's a high performing team, Shan.
It is. It's basically there's the from an HR point of view. On the one hand, we run as a family business. We don't run as a private equity funded or VC funded business. In that, in the early days of Nucleus, for example, one of my employees, his son had to be hospitalized, and essentially his baby son, he incurred a lot of hospital charges, but there was no medical insurance. Um, Basically, I paid for that hospital charges. I cleared it out of my pocket, my personal pocket. Um, Now we have medical insurance because we're a much larger company. We were only 20 people then. Now we are 280, 300-ish. So at that time I covered it. But that sort of thing was not done with it was because I genuinely felt sorry for him. I knew it would be an expense for him. I knew that he's worried about it, etc. But that buys a lot of loyalty, um, and people stay. So we have, and that's critical for people to stay because we can't take people off the bus stop and train them in this. It takes years for people to understand how is Argentina different from Brazil, different from Mexico, different to Canada, you know. And so all this knowledge is not just written down, but in people's heads as well. And if those people then push off, you've lost all that effort you put in. So people stay, and in fact, virtually all of my senior management team have been with the company minimum between 5 and 20 years. So it's a long time. We've been successful there by running it very much like a family-owned business and not like a private equity funded business. And we're looking for the long term. We're not looking to make fast bucks. We're looking to build long-term relationships with employees and with clients. So clients come back 2, 3, 4 times. So for example, on Monday I have a call with a prospective client, but he's been a client in 4 different companies and he's coming back for the 5th time. And that's a good sign. That shows that, your price point and your service quality point are at the best, are at an optimum.
Is that something you benchmark somehow?
Yes, we do actually have a testimonial database where clients often send emails spontaneously. We retain those, we keep those, and some of them are put on the website. But then we need client approval to disclose the client name.
Of course. So you've got 200 to 280 to 300 employees, and these are in the long tenured senior leadership team, which I find really important. I think stability is really important. It gives a chance to build relationships. There's a big win-win in building relationships when people really care for each other and they understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. You meet people. You meet people where they are. I've got strengths and weaknesses just like anybody. I really appreciate it when people accept my weaknesses and just kind of fill in the gap. I guess if you could finish the sentence, like the secret to managing a high performing global team is
no politics. Get the job done and do the best for the client. No politics. Basically, I would say that the politics is the beginning of the end of a company. If it's small, like ours, if it's medium, large, there's a certain momentum that carries them along. But shareholders' returns get reduced because of infighting and people trying to stick knives in other people's backs. So I have zero tolerance for politics. I won't tolerate it. That's the one thing that I just won't. And I'm not an easy boss, but I think I'm fair. I think the main thing I bring is not that I'm clever or anything. It's that I can find these clever people and I can get them to work together to produce a result for a client. And I think that's the only quality that's required to run this type of business, aside from, of course, being technically on top. But from a people management perspective, that's how it is. So there is a danger when you've got people in the business for up to 20 years that things can get stayed and set, and then businesses become ossified, and then they go down. So I regularly stir the pot. And when I stir the pot, I stirred the pot last week. It's the most recent pot I've stirred. And when I stir the pot, I'm not exactly the most popular guy, but people then get on their toes again. And that's what's needed, because people can get too comfortable if they've been with you too long. Um, and that's again a bad sign. So politics is one, and getting too comfortable in your seat is another one. But stirring the pot doesn't mean, like in America, that you go off on holiday and you come back to find somebody else working in your spot and you are out. That kind of worry people, I don't think is healthy for people. And I also think it's important for people to have more than 2 weeks leave a year.
Yeah, stirring the pot. Yeah, I think you got to break complacency, right? I think that's really what we're talking about. It can become very easy to start going through the motions when you've done something so many times. Yo-Yo Ma, the famous cellist, just wrote a book, or maybe it might be an Audible only audio thing, but he talks about keep maintaining a beginner's mindset, treating every day as though it's a brand new day. That's a hard thing to do. I turned a team around a few years ago, and I built a framework out of it, which I've tested many times, and it really works. But in the process of that, turning around that team, I ended up stirring the pot in a way that, just to borrow your analogy here, that was kind of interesting. This team had yelled at each other for months, and then I stepped in. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I stepped in to just try something out. And what was happening was they weren't actually aligned on the same goal, or they hadn't articulated their goal out loud to show that they were all trying to do the same thing. And so, and they lacked like a level of transparency with each other, where nobody could see what the other was doing. And that was creating politics. They lost the assumption that the other was doing their best and had good intentions. And so they were yelling at each other for months. And after I stepped in, they ended up completing their project in 5 days. They yelled at each other for 3 months. And then I healed them, and they finished their project in 5 days. It was amazing transformation for them and for me. One of the things we did is we established a rhythm of just doing a scrum. And so 7 a.m. Monday morning, every 15 people in a room, we just start writing down problems on the, and every problem gets heard. Doesn't matter if it's big or small. You don't even know if it's big or small yet. And then people would vote on them. Everybody gets a whiteboard marker, and you get 3 votes. Vote on your top 3 priority. And then people would volunteer to go work on one of these teams, and people would, we subdivided into, 3 or 4 teams in the morning, come back, report at noon, and add more problems, that sort of stuff. So we did this, 7 a.m., noon, 4 p.m. Monday. We did it again on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, as you say, I stirred the pot. I showed up 45 minutes late. I got there at 7:45, but I brought donuts. And, but they understood the rhythm at this point. So they didn't wait for me. They ran the meeting themselves. And when I showed up with donuts, they presented to me their plan. And it was really amazing. But it's like somewhere in there, complacency had happened. People stopped communicating, and they needed to come back together and learn how to communicate. And they actually learned how to do that in 2 days. And on the 3rd day, they were a self-organized team. And I'm just wondering, have you had to like interrupt something as I think disturbing as, like yelling for a long period of time?
No, because I never allowed it to start. Basically, uh, not within. I was once part of when I was a nuclear physicist, though, it did happen. I was part of an OECD working group that was developing a piece of software with about 35 different participants in the project from the US and from about 7 European countries in the UK. And basically, there was a lot of tension between different parts of the group, between different people in the group, and a lot of people disagreeing with each other so much that nothing actually got done. They just disagreed about how they should do things rather than do something at all. Um, and that group basically took 4 years to produce something that could have been produced in 1 year. But that's how international working groups operate, because you can't direct that. Um, every country has its own um, independence, if you like. So the representative from the UK can't tell the representative from Germany how to shut up and move on and belt up and do it. Can't do it. You can't do that. So it has to be sort of consensus management. Um, and consensus management is also a good model, so long as it's not always consensus. So in other words, you listen to everybody's opinion, you say very little, you listen, you take it in, you analyze it, you see how relevant it is, you look at your own opinion, then you decide. And when you decide, that's it. You implement it for good or for bad, the way you've decided. And then you don't have any further discussion. Whereas in this working group, even after a decision, there was discussion. So nothing happened. Or rather, things happened very, very slowly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's when there's no clear enterprise leader, right? I don't know how you make it's impossible to make decisions. It just takes forever. But you
Yeah, that
have to,
doesn't happen.
what's one of my favorite team rules is to, respect the decisions of the group. So get your disagreements out now, then we'll make our decision, and then don't back channel that decision. You need to let that decision live.
I think here it's a
So
little bit different. I want to hear your views. I want to hear the discussion where your views differ with each other. Thank you. I'll take it away. I'll give you my decision. And now that's it.
yeah, dissent's very good. That's how you get the thing right. This has been very fun. I want to ask you maybe one final question here. If you were to give advice to an entrepreneur about to take their first step in a new country, this is before they call you, I think. What's your advice to them?
Make sure that you have two things sorted clear and unequivocally. One is your plan for that country. Is it that you need a software expertise that's just one guy in that country and that's your sole interest in that country? Or have you got a plan to sell in that country or develop a R&D team or something like that? So make sure you have a clear-cut plan for that country, um, and make sure that you have a budget that is consistent with executing that plan. Too many companies go into foreign countries with expecting to spend too little and not realizing there are certain baseline costs when you expand internationally that you have to incur before you can see the benefits coming back. And you will basically incur those costs whether you like it or not, either by doing it properly upfront or by cutting the corners and then getting bitten in the butt 4 to 5 years later and being made to do it properly. And at that point, you've got the regulators on your back now for the next 10 years. So you might as well have done it properly from the beginning. So I've seen too many companies trying to expand on a shoestring, and they get away with it and they think that's fine. But then 4 to 5 years later, they get bitten in the butt. Probably the CFO that took them abroad like that has moved on to another job, and another CFO now has the problem. But the shareholders are going to suffer.
I've seen that in so many fields. I When I was in high school, I used to paint houses, and I remember we're working in a new housing development, and there was a guy across the street who was building a house, and he wanted to pick his own framer. And the general contractor didn't work with that framer. The general contractor had a framer. And the guy said, well, I want you to do the rest of the house. He said, it's going to cost you double because I'm going to have to fix what that guy did. And then you're going to have to pay me to frame the house in the first place. You got to get the foundations correct.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you a good example. One example from this area, a client became a client and they had 15 contractors in France. They're all contractors with contractor agreements with the US company. They were employees in everything but name. They reported to somebody in the US. They followed instructions from the US. Even their computers were provided by the US. They provided no tools of trade. They had no other customers. They were employees in every way. And it's illegal for a foreign company to hire people in France without setting up an entity of some sort, either Bureau de Liaison or a branch or a subsidiary. And there are different types of French subsidiaries. So the problem was that the client wanted to terminate all of them and get out of France. But they were using them illegally in the first place. So we had to set up a subsidiary, hire these people. Then we had to go through the complicated French process of firing these people, shutting down the subsidiary. And the whole process cost them about, in terms of payments to these people and everything included, about $400,000 over a period of 2 years before they could get out of France. It's the way not to operate.
Yeah, that's an expensive mistake. Well, Dr. Shan Nair, where can listeners find you?
They can find me at my email address, which is shan@nucleus-co.com.
We'll put that in the show notes. Is there anything you wish I asked that I haven't asked?
No, it's been a pleasure chatting to you.
Well, Dr. Shan Nair, thank you so much for joining me in the Lighthouse Leadership Podcast. I hope to see you again.
You're most welcome. Thank you again.